Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today I'm having Greek yogurt, almond butter, frozen blueberries. I've had a lot of people ask me this year, a few different times. I had people asking, Jason, how do you feel about your old big 5-string standard? And for those who remember the big 5-string standard, something I pushed a long time, a lot of people tried to reach it. I've seen a lot of people, even clients, come to me saying, hey, I have a goal of reaching that standard. So I should probably discuss kind of how I feel about it today. And for those who don't remember it, the big 5-string standard was a standard that I set and told people, if you can reach all 5 of these goals, all 5 of these lifts, you've reached this standard. And if you can do that, the point was that was not my strength standard to be strong. That was my standard for, if you can do this, you will look big walking down the street, top to bottom in shorts and a t-shirt. In other words, people will look at you and go, that's a pretty good sized guy. That guy lifts. Okay, that was it. They would say, that guy's pretty thick, he lifts, and he's, pretty good shape. That people would recognize you as a lifter, and you would be big top to bottom. And when I say top to bottom, I mean your traps all the way down to, your legs. Now, a lot of people would object to that. I'd hear people who say, oh, your standard is too low. People should get stronger than that. Well, of course they should. Of course they should. But that's not what the standard was. The standard wasn't to be considered really strong. The standard was, if you can do this, this is what will occur. This is what you will look like. People would always argue, well, what about shorter guys? That you can't expect shorter guys to be as big or have as much muscle and hit those numbers. And my answer is, yes, we can. Why? Because what does the standard represent? The standard was not a standard of relative strength. It was not a standard of this makes you strong. It was, will you look big and look like a lifter and appear to be in good shape to people walking down the street? People think about that for a moment. Why would the shorter lifter follow the same standard? The shorter lifters don't look as big in person because they're shorter, they're smaller. They have a less imposing stature. In other words, a guy who is 5'6" isn't going to be noticed as a lifter as easily walking down the street as a guy who's taller than him. He has to have a bit more muscle and thickness to pull it off. We're not talking about on camera, because people do that all the time. Well, that guy looks really big on camera and it's a short guy. Well, sure, because that's how bodybuilding and stuff works. But they don't look as big standing next to other lifters who are taller in person walking around. So yes, it applies to them also. So what was the standard? The standard was 500 deadlift, 400 squat, 300 bench. These are all for 1 rep maxes. A 200 press, to be a standing press, and a 100-pound weighted pull-up or weighted chin-up. The last one is done as a control and also because lats and biceps. Lats and biceps, when you're walking down the street in a t-shirt, matter. They do. Don't impact how big you look. Especially in the t-shirt, the arm part. Especially from behind the lat width. So, I would give this standard and people would say stupid stuff like, well, some person could just get really fat and hit all those. A person can get really fat and do a 100-pound weighted pull-up. Are you serious? Then again, the argument also, well, they hit 4 out of 5. So in other words, they didn't pass. because that standard was not 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. That's not what the standard was. It was a pass fail. Either you can do this, right? This meaning these 5 things, or you cannot. There is no I got 3 out of 5. No, you either got the whole thing or you didn't get it. Does that make more sense to people? So, in other words, you can't just bulk up and get fat to get your squat and bench up and everything to do this. It won't work, because then you may not even be able to do pull-ups or chin-ups at all, let alone a 100-pound one. And if you do, a fat guy who can do a 100-pound weighted chin-up or pull-up from a dead hang, the guy is fat and can do that, he's really jacked. That guy's got a big, thick back and probably has big arms, because he's doing more weight on a pull-up or a chin-up. So he's still going to look jacked walking down the street. He just won't look as fit. He'll still look big and jacked. It's kind of a foolproof system. So people say, hey, for a while you didn't like pull-ups or chin-ups after your shoulder impingement, but now you're doing them again. How do you feel about this whole thing? I would drop it to a big 4. And here's why. What does the overhead press really matter? Uses less muscle than a bench press. It uses the same muscles. And that upsets people too. Like, well, it uses more shoulder. Does it really use that much more shoulder? Uses a lot of front delt, but so does the bench press. Why is it that you can take lifters and get them strong at the close grip bench or the incline, and they can have a 200 press still without even doing the press? Clients who do that. You guys saw Doug do that. Client Doug, we didn't train the overhead press. He had a 200 overhead press. We didn't train that. We would just every few months, hey, let's see what we can overhead press. He didn't do overhead work. He had big shoulders from chest pressing, rear delts and traps and things from rowing. And he had pretty big shoulders, right? Pretty big guy overall. Doug looked jacked. Doug could also rep 90 pounds on a weighted pull-up. He could also bench 350. And start looking at it from this perspective. The overhead press doesn't bring anything special to the table. These other lifts at least work different muscles, right? They at least have different muscles involved. Overhead press, other than testing it, is just a lift itself. It's not indicative of more muscle than a bench is. And again, it's the same primary movers, just fewer of them. In other words, putting an overhead press in here is redundant. Now people would argue, well, what about delts? Well, if you want to look big, you should probably do some delt work, right? But I don't have a 1 rep max exercise that we can really test effectively for this. The overhead press is really not testing the shoulders particularly more than the bench press. So it's redundant. I would drop it to a big 4 standard. We could use classic big 3 squat, bench, deadlift, and then have a strong pull-up or chin-up. And if you can do those things, you'll reach this standard. Now, by that same token, here's what I'm going to say. The ironic part is probably to reach this standard, you're going to have to do a lot of hypertrophy work anyways. And if you do a bunch of hypertrophy work, this is really just a test. Because you can just ensure that you look big. You can just ensure that you get big. It's still a good standard, though. I think it's still a good standard for people to aim for, right? But the ironic part is that just doing heavy singles on all those movements is not going to get you jacked. Maxes are just a test. That's what they are. So I don't know how much importance I would really put on this standard other than to say, yeah, it's still a good standard to reach it to hit those things. And you could just throw the overhead press out completely and just call it a big 4 standard, right? Because again, we're with those classic lifts. but then we have the weighted pull up or weighted chin up to control for body fat and body composition, along with arm and lat size. Simple as that. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.